where do we go? And I guess one of the first things I think that's really worthwhile doing on most of the farms is just actually sitting back and having a real look and assessment of your farms. And I guess this is what we're doing when we're going on to farms at the moment with our clients, is we just spend a lot of time driving around the paddocks, where, you know, when we can get on the paddocks, and just sort of saying, well, what's the plan here? What's going on? Let's do a bit of a paddock audit. Let's start looking at what's growing at the moment in these paddocks, what's likely to grow over the next few weeks. What's our winter plan in that paddock, okay? And, you know, what are our proportions again? And Josh, you may have some comments here as we go forward, but what are our proportions of things like, you know, well-established perennial species? How much of what's growing in the paddock is just annual rubbish or annual garbage grasses? And I guess years like this, you know, probably in the Hunter Valley, and again, Kyle jump in, what we tend to see is softer summer grasses like liver seed grass, you know, quite prevalent, which is actually quite a useful forage when it's young and vegetative. Over on the coast, though, we can end up with a lot more of that really hard crab crowsfoot type grass, which is just absolute garbage, unpalatable, very low energy. And again, if we've got situations where this is growing back through old annual pastures, you know, it's actually got extremely low value for feed. So I guess one of the things that we'd probably suggest people undergo is almost a paddock by paddock audit, you know, and go through their whole farm, walk over each paddock and just sort of write down a comment, make a bit of a situation, you know, what's this paddock doing? What's it looking like? Is it suitable for grazing? Is it a high quality feed paddock? You know, are the species in it what we want? Okay, or is this just rubbish? Because I guess this is where we can start making a bit of a decision and start saying, well, these paddocks that are really low quality now, you know, we can let them keep growing, okay? And then we get stuck in a situation where if they keep growing, we've actually got to make decisions to manage them. We've either got to manage them with cows or conservation, okay? But the consequence of that, okay, and this is more of an issue if you've already got good feed inventories, the consequence of that is that we're either going to turn production down by pushing cows onto low quality pastures, or we're going to conserve feed. By the time it comes back out of the bale, okay, it's going to be 6 megajoule feed. And we saw a lot of this come even off the flush last year when some of these silages were retested off this summer flush. Yep, vast volumes made at moderate cost, but incredibly low quality feed that are very, very difficult to get milk out of. I guess some of the questions that this poses is that, you know, are there opportunities to maybe terminate some of these paddocks earlier and say, all right, let's get them out of the system, let's lock them into an early fallow, let's get rid of the weeds, let's stop them utilising nutrients, let's take away the obligation to manage them with either grazing or conservation and have them sitting there ready. So come late February, we're in a position where we can plant. So look, I'll throw that out to the group for discussion, but I think it's something we should chat. And Kyle, Josh, you may have some comments, but again, anyone else in the group that would have comments on this, you know, I think it's a good time to bring that to the fore. What are people thinking? Are people looking at their paddocks? Are they seeing some paddocks that are good quality, some that are just rubbish? How are we looking with feed on farm?
Yeah, Neil, my quick comment would be our biggest problem in the Hunter, which obviously is slightly different to the North Coast, we do have that liver seed grass, you know, which isn't bad quality feed, and you look at it and it's, you know, still milk in it. But the minute it does turn back to being hot, it is going to shut down and you end up with nothing. So, you know, unlike having a paddock of sorghum or millet or something like that you can manage. So, you know, making those decisions, that knowing that they've got, you know, 3 or 4 weeks more feed left, and starting to, you know, take out those thinner paddocks and get ready for oats or brassica or whatever it may be, is really, you know, something to assess and really mark where you're at, I guess. So that's our biggest problem. And we've seen a hell of a lot of annual broadleaf weeds as well. So in that assessment, if you've got broadleaf problems, you know, look to a combination spray if you are spraying out, you know, to take out, you know, both grass and broadleaf and get those cleaned up. We're seeing a lot of issues with paddy melons, and if you think about it from a point of view of your drill seeding, if they get, you know, 3 and 4 meters, which, you know, that happens pretty quick, it makes an absolute mess when you're trying to drill seed paddocks in, you know, March. So trying to take out those problems now is definitely a benefit. So
yep. Josh, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, look, and it's a bit of two worlds as well. So, definitely where we've got our Kikuyu farms that are mostly predominantly 100% Kikuyu, and Neil or Sam or someone pop in here as well, James, that is. So, yeah, look, we've got those sort of farms that have got a lot of Kikuyu coming out. Some of them have got some waterlogging going on, which, is probably a bit of a benefit just to slow up some of the pasture at the moment as well, so they can get on top of it. But at some stage, and then, when it does dry out, they're going to start to take off as well, which will add more complexity. So that does remove some of the area from the rotation. But, yeah, definitely it becomes hard, but there is paddocks, especially if you go inland a bit more, whether they've been cropping them in the past and they haven't got summer crops in them this year because they've got plenty of feed, or whether they haven't recovered from the drought with their summer pastures, whether it's paspalum or Kikuyu, and they haven't recovered as well, Neil.
Yep.
So getting out there and assessing those pastures to say, are these pastures something that are going to be beneficial in the next 3 months in terms of summer pastures, and then rating them as, yes, no, or can I work with them? Is really important to be able to set your rotation up and then make decisions what you're going to do with those paddocks, because there are some paddocks around that, whether they've been cropping paddocks in the past or whether they just haven't recovered from the drought that well, that may not have the preferred species Kikuyu and things like that in it, that might have a lot of crow's foot and crabgrass and nutgrass and all these other things that really are not beneficial at all. And dealing with that now, and removing that so that you can plant early is definitely the way to go. But I've got some notes here about our Kikuyu management and some options we can talk about, but I think we'll get to that a bit further down the.
No, we will, Josh. Yep. Yeah. Okay, well, look, let's flick it open to the group. If anyone got some comments or questions with this, lots of things that we can discuss in this space.
Can I make a comment then while James is coming on? Yeah, for me, I'd be looking at around 25% of the farm trying to get ready for winter or autumn sowing, and it's going to take 6 weeks when there's a good situation like now to spray back and get rid of whatever coverage is there to get into a position to sow first week or second week of March. It's pretty important to start pretty soon, and it's important to utilise the feed that's there and try and keep that quality there, but getting that autumn feed in early is what can really drive profits through that autumn winter period. So that'd be the only comment that I think we've really got to get onto it now. It's easy to, I know I'd sort of relax a little bit when there's rain and things are going easy and you have a bit of a break, but you're starting, I'd suggest, at least taking some of the farm and really starting to plan ahead. If the whole farm looks a bit too daunting of a plan, at least tackle 25% or half of it and really get going with that.
Yep. And look, I think that captures a few real nice thoughts there, Rob. I mean, quite often it can be a bit overwhelming when we get grass like this. And I was on a farm in the Lower Hunter earlier in the week, and I guess the situation there is that we had 200 acres of rampantly growing summer grasses and a bit of regrowth and some annuals. We had probably 25% of that farm was good quality Kikuyu. I guess our planning there was the first thing we sat back, and I'll show you some calculations on this sort of stuff shortly, was to say, well, look, how much of this farm do we actually need each day? Okay, and we can go through and even look at that right now. If we know what our pasture intake is and we've got a vague idea of what our growth rates are, then we can sit back and say, well, look, we've got 200 cows. Our target pasture intake is about 15 kilos of dry matter a day. We know a growth rate at the moment is going to be sitting anywhere between 80 and 150 kilos per hectare per day, depending on the system. Okay. And our utilisation of that feed, look, we don't really need to chase super high utilisation of summer pastures. I think if we do, then we end up forcing cows to eat a lot of lower quality feed, and we can push production down. If we've got 75% utilisation of summer pastures, I'm pretty happy. So we go through the calculation. If we've got 200 cows at 15 kilos intake a day, we need about 3,000 kilograms of dry matter. If we correct that for utilisation, Okay, we just divide that 3,000 by about 0.75, which is 75%. That means we need about 4,000 kilos of dry matter a day. So if we're growing at about 80 a day, that means we only require in that situation with that herd size and that growth matrix about 50 hectares. Okay, which basically means anything outside that 50 hectares becomes surplus. So that surplus can either be targeted for conservation specifically, or as Rob said, we can isolate part of our farm to be utilised for taking out for early planting. Now the reality is that that growth rate may be pushing up into this sort of 150 kilos of dry matter per hectare zone. And in that situation, you know, it's quite remarkable how little area you need to actually manage and feed cows very, very well during summer periods. So if we look at that growth rate, if we got up to 150, then we'd be needing as little as 27 hectares to run 200 cows. And quite often through this time of year, we find that if you're managing a lesser area with a higher intensity, so shorter grazing rotations, better feed quality, keeping a little bit of fertiliser in the system in that smaller area, not so much to grow more grass, but to help maintain quality, okay, we can be in a very, very comfortable position with a small part of the farm, giving us lots of other options. So I guess the challenge we have with a lot of our farms is that if we're stocked at 2 or 3 cows to the hectare, you know, that's probably perfectly appropriate for 50% of the year. Problem is when we get into this situation, if we're trying to manage the whole farm with cows, the farm could probably cope with 6, 7, 8 cows per hectare from a growth perspective. So I guess, look, I'll throw that back at the group, and if people have any comments or questions around that slide, yeah, let's talk about that.
Just go back to that last slide, if you can. Yep, I reckon that's the key to that is, and sort of going back to what Rob said as well about, you know, sometimes it's easy to get relaxed. And look, I get phone calls from people saying, oh, how good is it, we've got grass, and, you know, I don't have to feed cattle, and it's quite easy. But I guess my experience from watching, you know, really successful and good operators is this is when they're busy. This is when they're flat out. This is when they're really trying to get their grazing right. They're trying to conserve feed. They're trying to keep quality, you know. So the risk here is that if it's growing 150 kilos, which I've got no doubt it is, it gets out of control really quick. So whilst we sit there and say we can get 15 kilos of dry matter into these animals, you know, it only takes a week or two of getting your grazing wrong and getting out of control of quality-wise, okay? And then all of a sudden we're struggling to get 8 kilos into those animals just due to the quality of that pasture going downhill real quick. And it's a quick spiral, you know, you'd agree. And there'd be some farmers on here that would have seen this happen time and time again, that, you know, it turns from 60 kilos to 150 kilos within a week. And then all of a sudden we're not on top of it. And within a couple of weeks, we've got feed, you know, we're growing stem. And if anyone's seen any of that Bill Fulkerson's work about, you know, once you get past that 4 leaf stage or 4.5 leaf stage, you start growing a more proportion of stem, okay, and dead material starts to develop. And high-performing animals aren't going to eat that. So we're going to be starting to drop that intake back to 10, 8 kilos, and we're actually growing more. So we end up, you know, growing more pasture, eating less, getting more out of control, and then we sort of say it's a bit too hard. So, you know, I think right now and dealing with this and having, you know, using your tools, and everyone's got different tools to be able to deal with this. We'll go through them a bit later, but being able to use those tools to make sure you keep on top of it, to keep, you know, that herd going forward, and then managing your farm so your next regrowth of pasture is good, and you also set up for autumn is the key to it. Yeah.
I just jump in, Josh.
Yep.
Same here. I farm on Jones Island, which is just north of Taree, opposite James Neal on Oxley Iron. So we farm on a floodplain, and so for December and the sort of first half of this month, we were quite waterlogged. We only stopped feeding silage 2 weeks ago, just because we couldn't get onto paddocks, but we had to feed cows on you know, the drier paddocks where we could. So our rotation was thrown out of whack. But just this last week, it's just started to dry out, and yeah, like Josh was saying, the kikuyu has just gotten well away from us. So we're constantly changing our rotation, you know, every couple of days, just to keep on top of it, giving them more amounts, just so we're even though they're wasting a bit, you know, we can manage that, but we want to be grazing it at that, you know, at that ideal stage to get the most quality out of it. So that's sort of on the floodplain here. What we're starting, we know, because we have been a bit of a delay because it was all waterlogged, but it's just starting to take off, explode on us now.
Sam, just a quick one after speaking to you the other day as well. So, you know, you've recognised that it's growing out of control, and we need to try and get the cows across it to take the quality feed and get milk production and make the utilisation of that. But, you know, like you said, then, you know, you're wasting a bit, but that's okay because, you know we can't cut it at the moment because you can't get tractors on it or whatever. But you did mention that you were going behind and you know, topping and resetting that residual to deal with the waste.
It's drying up now that you can get the mulcher on paddock. So we're following the cows with the mulcher just to reset that residual because it's been so wet. We haven't, the mulcher's been in the shed for the past 2 to 3 months. So some of these paddocks haven't been topped for a long time. So there's a lot of dead thatch starting to build up there. So we want to reset that residual and top dress it with some urea, some nitrogen, because a lot of that nitrogen would have been lost during when it was waterlogged and the wet weather. So yeah, we're just starting to do that this week.
Yeah, so that's good, Sam. So you're removing the quality feed with the animals, and then you come back and saying, you know, if we don't remove this, we're going to have issues next time. Also talking about, you know, setting up for planting in autumn. We don't want to have a big thatch and big issues there. So you're starting to get ahead of the curve. And if you knock the growth of the point of the kikuyu around at this time, it's not going to hurt you because you've got plenty of feed going in front of you anyway, and you're going to come back with quality feed.
So Sam, have you sat back and done a calc like this to work out how many hectares you're likely to need in your grazing rotation to maintain good pasture quality?
Haven't, no. I just took a photo of it then, so I can try and get to some figures around it.
Yep. Now, look, I think it's excellent, and you know, it's quite often when you're in a predominantly kikuyu area, if you can work out your core area, perhaps that you really want to maintain quality on, it may be that you then actively partition some other off to say, look, if we try and manage that with cows as well, okay, we're going to run into trouble because while it's getting eaten, the other stuff's just going to get ahead of us. And it may be that we say, well, look, that stuff is reasonably drained. Maybe we're just going to say target that for silage and just block it out of the rotation if you potentially can. Because I guess if we get in this perpetual situation of chasing with cows, you know, that residual just rises and rises and rises and rises and rises. And it's very, very difficult to beat it. And I guess it's that issue of being as nimble as you can with the conditions that you've got. And saying, look, if we've got a 3-day window, it doesn't matter if it's not quite ready for cutting. We've got a 3-day window. So we're just going to take out what we can't eat in the next 4 or 5 days and just get it out of the system and being as aggressive as the conditions allow you to be with that. Because the reality is at this time of year, if you know you've got a fully charged moisture profile with the heat and the warmth, you know, you're not going to run out of feed. It's nearly impossible to run out of feed, except for if you get too wet to get on paddocks. You know, and if you do get a bit tight, well, we can just roll out a couple of bales, and in 3 days it will have caught up anyway. So it's almost sort of saying, well, look, let's just be really tight on what we can manage on a 10 to 14 day rotation, and everything else maybe we just say, well, look, let's try and keep a bit of focus on quality with our cutting as well. And if we get a 3-day window, we just get out and we go. So look,
we're quite fortunate. We've got our own silage gear, so we have that option to sort of make it that quick, you know, 2-3 day decision. Whereas, you know, some other farmers that have to get in contractors mightn't have that option. They might have to wait. So everyone's different.
So we talk about what we did with this farm and the hunter. Basically, all the growth had already happened. So we said, okay, guys, take that 35 hectares of forage off, and then we're just going to spray that out, okay, because that was lower quality summer grasses. Once you've got that off, take it out, get it out of your face, so you're not worried about it for the next 6 weeks. So we're going to get rid of that biomass. We'll have a forage of sorts in the shed, but that then brings that herd back onto the other 50-60% of the farm, which can then be more manageable. So there's going to be different tools depending on where you are And again, Kyle, you may have some comments here, but if again in the hunter, if you're getting rampant growth in the dry land, for example, I think there's some great opportunities in that hunter black soil dry land country to say, okay, let's get that stuff out of our face, lock it into fallow, and have that ready to go with some oats in sort of mid-late February. But yeah, Kyle, you might want to jump in with some comments there.
Yeah, very much so. I guess our way of managing a lot of this country is cut and carry, or cut and put aside, and that is one of my recommendations at the moment, is just start getting that country prep, those dry land opportunities, get them sprayed out, and keep moving forward. You know, the only way you can get that quality coming back away is get it off. That's our biggest problem we've got. So as I said, like we literally have been, you know, without grazing, paddocks that generally would be cut and carry to, you know, between 4 and 8 weeks, you know, between a cut. So it's getting a jungle in some places. So yeah, getting it off, get it come away again. We've got enough moisture in the profile for a whole nother cut. What's sitting here? So
yep.
You know, without even irrigating, without putting a pump back in the river. So yep.
Excellent. Luke, what sort of strategies are you guys looking at the moment?
It's all right. I can talk. We've basically had to feedlot the whole herd, just like it was this time last year through the drought, because it just got so wet. You know, I think 700 millimetres December, January, a 3-week period, and the cotton had much bogged up. 2 or 3 inches of rain down on the river flats, eating us. And yeah, the cotton paddock still, if you put a beast or a tractor in, you'd make a hell of a mess. So in another week's time, we might be able to do something. But yeah, it's a bit of a butt really. And you know, do we pre-mow it? Do we put them in and then slash or mulch after? Or do we look at making some fairly low quality silage? But again, if it's wet underneath, it's pretty hard to do that too.
Well, it's like a steaming rack, isn't it, rather than a drying rack at the moment? So it is a bit of a challenge, Luke. And I guess if it hasn't got out of control at the moment, getting onto that young sorghum is probably not a bad plan.
So
yeah, look, you're just dropping in and out a bit, mate. We might get Simon. What's happening up in the Manning at the moment? How are you guys managing this wet pasture and this rampant growth?
Yeah, we're back on grass at the moment, so we're able to graze. It's probably too wet to get machine, you know, to make hay or something. As you're saying, you're gonna steam anything you cut, not dry it. There.
And have you seen any damage in some of your herbs this summer?
Yeah,
Simon?
Chicory's taken a real caning. So we're sort of, you know, going through and grazing that at the moment, then following it with the mower and going with a verdict spray at the moment, because of course, you know, the chicory struggled and the summer grasses has taken off many bare country in there. So we're basically this week going through and grazing it and following it with a verdict, which is going to take it out of action for 4 weeks with a withhold. But at least that'll allow us then to concentrate, or, you know, increase our stocking rate on our Kaiku country and keep it under control. That's the plan.
So you can keep a bit more pressure on that and keep the quality in its on.
Yeah. And we've got some country that we'll fallow and an early sow then. So yeah, that'll help later on.
Excellent.